mean, at the end of the day, like this, it's not a political situation. Like this war isn't a political situation for us. Like we are fighting for our lives. And so that's what's important right now, is just to stop it. It doesn't matter what your politics are or who you think should be in power here or there. Like, I mean, outside of Russia or Ukraine. We just need to highlight this, and we need our attention on it, and we need it to end. And that's it. We need to preserve human life. That's just the most important thing.
Today is March 1st, 2022. 5 days ago, Russia launched a large-scale invasion of Ukraine, its neighbor to the southwest, marking a dramatic escalation of the Russo-Ukrainian War that began in 2014. It is the largest conventional military attack on European soil since World War II. I'm speaking today with Kseniya, a Ukrainian friend who immigrated to the west coast of the United States 20 years ago with her mom. Kseniya studied journalism and sociology at the University of Washington. She currently does copywriting and marketing at a fitness startup in New York. Previously, Kseniya worked with the Daybreaker team, which is a wellness community and sober morning dance party movement, inspiring happiness around the world. Kseniya is also a former pro ballroom dancer. She competed professionally and coached world champions. As she puts it, I dance with my words and write stories with my body. Kseniya currently lives in Brooklyn, New York with her partner Mango, and she's currently in a closet in Costa Rica. Thank you for being here, Kseniya.
Thank you, Tommy, and thank you for outing my laundry closet where I am currently situated. It's really good to see you again. I'm really happy to have this opportunity to talk about Ukraine with you.
I'm going to start with that. How are you and how is your family?
Yeah, this question, how are you, has been very difficult for me to answer since last Wednesday. To be honest, I'm not good. I'm not good at all. I'm really overwhelmed constantly, and I feel myself stuck in a loop of anxiety and fear for my family and worry. We live in a unique time where we are essentially getting information about a war in real time, and anyone can access it, and not just things that are held back by the media, but I can watch videos of, innocent women missing limbs from rocket explosions, or, children being shot, or people sleeping in the subways that I used when I visited Kiev. And all this stimulus is really overwhelming, but at the same time, I feel like it's my obligation as a Ukrainian to follow along. And so, every day I wake up and the first thing I do is check the news, and then I check the Ukrainian subreddit, and then I check my Twitter feeds that I follow from Ukrainian sources. And it's all I think about all day, nonstop. And so even now I'm in Costa Rica, and it's been, this is a good problem to have, but it's been very difficult for me to unwind and to unplug completely, because I care so deeply about my family and my country and everything that this represents. And so then, to take it back to my family, my dear aunt and my uncle and my baby cousin, who are very, very close people to me. My aunt, she's my mom's sister. She's 8 years younger than her, and she raised me alongside her, and she was my best friend growing up. Whenever I visit Ukraine, they're the people that I go to, they're the people that I stay with. I stayed in their home. I stayed in the home that they had to flee with their child. I was there when she was born, in that apartment, right? So they had to flee, and they are now sleeping every night, underground in like a bunker to hide from possible explosions. So we haven't even heard that much from them in the past few days, but I know that they don't have much food or water. I know that there's very little access to those supplies near where they are. Ukrainians just didn't think this would actually happen. And my family specifically, we had, my mom had spoken to them and asked, a week before the invasion, whether they could leave the country and stay with some friends. And their perspective at the time was, well, why would we leave if we we don't even know how long this will last for? What if we can never come back? And they love, Ukraine, and they love their identity and their home there. And so it was just a decision that was something that they didn't make. And so they didn't even stock up on food. When the first night, when they started shelling Kiev, they didn't even have water in their apartment. And so ultimately, they made the decision to leave because they were right by an airport. You could see the airport from their window in Kiev. And, that's going to be one of the first targets for the military from the Russian side. And with a 4-year-old, you really can't take any chances. But instead of going west, they actually went east to close to Kremenchug, which is the city that I'm from, because we have other family there as well, because the roads were so backed up. They barely had any gas. And then also, if my family were to leave Ukraine, they would have to be separated because my uncle is, of course, of fighting age. So he would have to stay behind and fight. So, it's an impossible situation. It's hard for me to even fathom. It's all I think about all day. I have another cousin who's 11 who is in Kiev right now with his mom and his grandparents, and he can't get out. So, and then I have miscellaneous other extended family all over the place that I haven't even been, hearing from or haven't reached out to because we're not particularly close, but they're still my family, right? So it's been very tough.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I think that's the difficulty of here. And this is what I'm trying to share also today, is for people to be able to empathize and understand what's going on, and to be able to understand that these are people with families, with jobs, and with lives, and they're being invaded right now. Can you describe to someone who might just be reading the headlines? I know you're looking more in depth than most people. Could you describe what's going on in Ukraine, what has been going on in the last week?
Yeah, so in order to understand what's going on now this week, you kind of have to rewind a little bit. You have to rewind 8 years, and you have to go specifically back to 2013 when the Euromaidan protests started in Kiev, which erupted because there was a pro-Russian president in place. His name was President Viktor Yanukovych, and he refused to sign a political association and free trade agreement with the EU, which the Ukrainian people were really pushing for and really wanted, because that's just been the trend for the past 2 decades is Ukrainians, notice I say Ukrainians and not Ukrainian politicians, have wanted to westernize and become part of the EU. So Yanukovych at the time had instead chosen closer ties with Russia. And there was a lot of speculation about corruption. He was considered widely to be one of the most corrupt figures in politics at that time. And also it was suspected to be a puppet government from the Kremlin, right? So it didn't seem that that government was acting autonomously in a democratic way in the first place. And so this was a really big monumental moment for Ukrainians, because I was surprised at the time to see that these widespread protests erupted, and eventually ended in 2014 with them signing an agreement to form an interim government and then have another election, and Yanukovych fled before he had the chance to be impeached. And so all those officials fled. And this was a big kick in the butt for Putin. He was absolutely livid, and he did not agree with this action. He considered the overthrow of Yanukovych to be an illegal coup, which he now says was led by neo-Nazis. And he did not recognize the government as legitimate, the interim government that was agreed to. And at that moment, there were also protests for the revolution and a few against it as well. And those that were against it, which were much more sparse than the ones that were for it, happened to be in the eastern and southern regions of Ukraine, where there are more Russian speakers at the moment. And as these protests escalated, Russia introduced its military into Ukraine, and it kind of legitimized the establishment of these self-proclaimed proto-states in Donetsk and Luhansk, this is also a whole murky thing that we can talk to, because there's all this talk of there being pro-Russian separatists and rebels. And a lot of people speculate that it's actually, Russian actors in disguise, because there never really was this desire to be away from Ukraine until this erupted, right? And so this escalated. It led to the illegal annexation of Crimea, the war in Donbass. And so I just wanted to explain this, because a lot of people don't realize that a war has been going on in Ukraine since 2014. 14,000 lives have been lost. There's always on the border some action. And again, it's mostly initiated from Russia's side. So then, and also, mind you, that Putin tried to hide his involvement from Donbass the entire time and claimed that the military was not related to him. The pro-separatists had nothing to do with him, etc. They just didn't want to be part of Ukraine. So then we fast forward to late 2021, so like December of this past year, and a lot of people noticed that there was a major military buildup from Russia's side near Ukraine's borders. And that's kind of what, dominated, I would say, the news cycle, especially in the United States for the past few months, is kind of tracking this buildup. And he, of course, denied that there was any kind of desire from his side to wage war, blah, blah, blah. But ultimately, he did it because Ukraine expressed an affinity to want to be considered for NATO again. And for him, this is the biggest threat imaginable because NATO is an alliance that is supposed to keep Russia in check. Not to mention that it shows that Ukraine is interested in westernizing. And for him, this is a huge threat since it is a country that is close to his border. And so ultimately, this escalated very quickly in a matter of days. So he demanded that Ukraine be barred from ever joining the military alliance. And when it seemed like that wasn't going to happen, he had this huge rambling speech about how Ukraine isn't even a state, how it's full of neo-Nazis, and how he needs to demilitarize and denazify the nation and save the Ukrainian people from the corrupt government. And so that's his duty to save them. And it started by him saying that he was going to go and launch a special military operation in Donbass in those two regions that I mentioned, which he also officially recognized as independent states, essentially, which is also an illegal move. He has no authority to recognize them as such. And initially he said that he was going to help those people because they were asking him for help from Ukrainians who were being killed by other Ukrainians, right? And so then that led to a full-scale invasion from every possible side. All the major cities in Ukraine started getting shelled and bombed, even though he said that he was only coming in to help the Donbass region. And so here we are today. Ukraine did not provoke this. I really appreciate the fact that in your intro, you said this is an invasion, because it is. A war implies that there are two sides, there's stakes that both parties want, and there was a conflict that grew up like this. Like, this was an aggression from Russia's side. This was a violation of Ukraine as a sovereign nation. They came in, they had no right. From my perspective, as a Ukrainian person who was aware of, the sequence of events. And so now every day, the war is moving quickly. Every day there's updates. As of late, Putin is threatening nuclear arms, supposedly in defense, because he's seeing all these responses from the West being aggressive to the Russian nation. And so now there's a threat of that. He continues to shell Ukrainian cities like Kharkiv, which is close to the Russian border and is home to many Russians and Russian ethnic Ukrainians by nationality. And even amongst peace talks, which were unsuccessful yesterday. And it's a truly awful situation.
It seems like one thing that you mentioned, you mentioned Putin, and you say, he's attacking us. And it's really interesting to see. And also when you read the press, it's a lot about Putin wants this. And I'm curious to understand the perspective of, do the Russian people want this? Also in his speech, he also mentions, some call it propaganda, that the Ukrainians want this and they need this help. When you see how the Ukrainians are fighting so bravely and so hard, it kind of feels like maybe they don't want this. But a lot of people are putting it on Putin, on this one person. Do you also see it that way? Do you really feel like it's this one person who has this ambition, who wants to reconquer the Soviet Empire and grow the Russian Empire? Is this really a lot on this one man that's pushing this and creating this story maybe in his head? Or are Russians excited about this? Are Russians wanting this? I'm curious to hear your take about that.
That's a really good question. It's a really good question because I have specifically tried my best not to lump the general Russian population with Putin and his leadership, right? So the first thing is Putin is the leader of a group of like his secretary general, all these like high-ranking officials, as well as Russian oligarchs. He works to make sure that they all have money, that they're all supported, etc. So he is the mastermind behind this. Of that, I'm fairly certain, but he would not have been able to do this without support, right? If everyone in his cabinet, if everyone who was around him said no, he wouldn't have been able to launch this operation. And so there are a number of leaders, all of them really right now, who are complicit to what he is doing right now. As far as the general Russian population, it's, again, very hard for me to say. It would be easy for me to be like, all Russians are evil, all Russians want Ukrainians to die. I don't want to believe that. And I have Russian friends. They are Russians who are specifically living in Russia, are working against propaganda. They're working against the corrupt police that they fear, working against a president who literally assassinates people. And this is known. This is not some conspiracy. Like, there's plenty of evidence to support it. He throws people in Siberia or people go missing if they speak up against his regime. So I can understand that fear, but at the same time, I believe that any Russian person who is not speaking out against injustice, who isn't protesting in Russia, who isn't, calling their sons and asking them to come home, or who is preventing them from going to war in the first place, is complicit to this crime. I understand fear. Ukrainian people understand fear, especially right now. But in these instances, it's so clear what is right and what is wrong that I don't believe that there is room for grayscale. But also, like, they are victims in this as well. Like, I've watched countless videos of Russian soldiers calling their families, or, screenshots of recovered texts, and their mothers don't even know where they are. They were told that they were going on a training exercise, and then they were put into Ukraine and told to shoot people who look exactly like them, many of whom speak the same language as them. And so it's all these young men being asked to fight for an agenda that comes from high up above, which is not to say that there aren't radicalized Russians as well who want to kill and slaughter Ukrainians. I've seen videos of that as well, right? What's problematic for me is there are many Russian people in the United States who continue to support Putin, even outside of his propaganda machine. There are people who troll comments and say, well, what about your American government? Even though they are Americans or neutralized citizens and have children who are born here. My dad is part of all these Facebook groups, and he's from East Russia. And so he has classmates back home that he's able to check in on and see how they're talking about this. And they're defending Putin and his actions. And there are Russians who want Ukrainians to die because they don't think that they're real people, because they've bought into this propaganda. So, it's really all over the scale. Despite that, again, I'm just trying not to speak like that. And so it's easier for me to say Putin, but I don't want to give him all of the power either, because he doesn't have all the power in the situation. That is the mirage that we're painting, right? And collectively.
I think it's always interesting to empathize with, especially your enemies, people attacking you. I think we can try to empathize with Putin, try to understand what he's wanting. I'm curious here because you mentioned some Russians don't see Ukrainians as real people. You mentioned that. What is their legitimate reason to fight, to come take over Ukraine and to claim it as part of Russia? Is it counter the pressures of NATO and the West? Is it really something against the Ukrainians particularly? Because it seems like Ukrainians and Russians there's a lot of similarities, right? The birth of the Soviet Union was actually in Kiev, which is currently where people are fighting today. And there's a similarity in languages and culture, but there is this separation since the independence, since the Soviet Union has collapsed in the early 1990s. There is more of this separation, it seems, right? From my understanding, the separation has increased in the last, 30 years? It's kind of our age, right? It's when you were probably born around that time. And it has been separating and being less Russian and feeling less in those values. So those pressures seems like this is what's a bit being created here. But I'm curious to understand the empathy for also this Russian of what's right in their perspective?
I think you began this question by asking why would Russians want to come into Ukraine and fight? And I don't think there's any legitimate reason for them. I think that everything that they internalize has been fed to them from Putin and the Kremlin propaganda machine about how there's Nazis in Ukraine and who are killing Ukrainian and Russian people, and they don't want Russian people to live. They don't want the Russian language spoken there, etc. It's all just propaganda, and so I assume they must think that they're enraged by this, and the thought of Russians being killed for speaking Russian enrages them, which is funny because Ukrainians are being killed right now for speaking Ukrainian and wanting to be Ukrainian. And I can say that no Russian speakers in Ukraine are being killed for speaking Russian. In fact, most people in Ukraine speak both languages. If I go back to my own childhood, so I was born in Ukraine. I was born in 1994, so I was born 3 years after Ukraine became independent. And so when I went to preschool, I was already being taught Ukrainian before Russian, because the preschools were now being taught in Ukrainian, which is our distinct language that has been around since the 13th century. That was the first sign of Ukrainian as a language being distinct. And it's completely different from Russian. Like, it sounds more like Polish than like Russian. There are completely different words. The differences are stark. I can no longer understand Ukrainian because when I moved to the States with my mom, my stepdad only speaks Russian. And so he spoke Russian at home. My mom's Ukrainian was never super, super great because she grew up during the Soviet Union when Ukrainian was literally forbidden from being spoken in schools and institutions, etc. And I had to learn English, which was very stressful for me. And so now, this is one of my sadnesses, is that I don't speak Ukrainian fluently anymore. But when I go to Kiev now, all the young people speak Ukrainian. They all know it. Ukrainian, there was just a law recently passed that Ukrainian is being taught in schools and universities and institutions, etc. But at the same time, Russian is being spoken as well. Kiev is a metropolitan city. Like, there's just, Ukrainians speak Russian with the Ukrainian accent. There's little changes like that. And I will say more Ukrainians speak Ukrainian on the west side of the country and more Ukrainians speak Russian on the east side. This is just because of the way the population settled when the Soviet Union collapsed. But this question is interesting because, they're similar. They share a similar history. Kievan Rus, where both Ukrainian and Russian culture was born as our shared heritage. But ultimately, Ukraine evolved and Ukrainians evolved as a completely different entity. We have Polish and Lithuanian influences from being ruled by the Poland Lithuania regime after the Mongols conquered us that Russia doesn't have, because they were at the time still being ruled by Mongols and then by the Muscovites. So that happened. Ukraine has existed for a very long time before its formation as an independent state in 1991, right? So it was never called Ukraine, the country, until actually 1917 was the first time when we kind of separated from Russian imperial rule. And then it was called Ukraine as a state of the Soviet Union. But I want to be clear that Ukraine is not a new country in the sense that it does not, it didn't not exist before 1991. It's existed since, Kievan Rus formed, which was in the close of the, I think, 8th century, maybe even earlier. And so we're just different ethnicities. It's not even splitting hairs, really. We're just different people. Ukrainians have always been a little bit more outspoken. They wanted to be more westernized. They're more open to fighting for their freedoms. We've had 2 revolutions already in the past 2 decades. In 2004, we had the Orange Revolution. In 2014, we had the Revolution of Dignity after the Euromaidan protests. So people in Ukraine want to be free. We have always fought for our freedom. They're not afraid to speak up. Everyone has always suppressed Ukrainian language, Ukrainian customs, but people are people. And so you can't pound out of someone their native state. Russia always will always want to see it, at least under the current regime, will want to see it in its sphere of influence and not recognize the fact that these are tangible differences. Like even if you look at names, like my last name, Sovenko, Enko is a specifically Ukrainian suffix. People who are from Russia, from the area that is now modern day Russia, don't have this last name. They usually have in or ov as last name like suffixes. And it's, Ukrainians are indigenous to Ukraine. I can't like stress this enough. And it was particularly hurtful for me to hear that speech I had mentioned earlier from Putin, where he says that we are all one people and Ukraine is a state that exists because of the Bolsheviks, because they gave away too much land. And so Stalin created Ukraine. This is bullshit. Like, to be frank, like I can't mask it. It's just not true. Kiev has existed for a very long time with specifically Ukrainian influence and Ukrainian identity. And so to say that we don't exist or that we're a threat because we are just different, it is, it's too much. It's too much to say this. I don't know if that answered your question. It was kind of hard to
my question also went all over the place. But it's interesting to see, and I think you really teach me something there. And in a way, Ukraine has been there before Putin was there, and so is more legitimate or exists more than actually he does, which is an interesting thought. And I think I'm curious to understand, what does it look like if, and you mentioned it, Ukrainians are outspoken, they fight for what they believe in, and they're currently exactly doing that. They're really fighting against this. And I want to understand, if you could paint that picture of what does it look like if they would lose this battle, if Russia would take over Ukraine and it would be part of Russia. What does it look like for you? What does it look like for your family? I'm curious to understand that picture better.
I will say that Ukrainians will never surrender. Like, we don't want to be Russian. We want to be Ukrainian. And so we have endured so much as like a people. We've, it's unfathomable to me to think about being Russian ever. And mind you, like, I have to be transparent about something. When I did 23andMe, I found out that my actual biological makeup is Ukrainian, Polish, and Russian. So I have Russian blood in me. But even so, I will never say I'm Russian because it's not where I was born. I was not born in Russia. I was born in Ukraine. And it's not the identity that I choose for myself. I feel Ukrainian and therefore I am. It's really as simple as that. The will to want to be something is all that you need, especially if it's part of a recognized sovereign free country, right? It's not like I'm just being like, oh yeah, I'm going to invent my own ethnicity because I feel this way, or my own identity because I feel this way. Like, this is a tangible, legitimate thing. And so to go back to your question, I can't imagine going back to a Ukraine that is ruled by Russia. I would not give him the satisfaction. It would be, heartbreaking for me, of course, but I think a lot of Ukrainians feel this way, and that's why we're fighting so hard, is because we want to be who we are. We've gone through the oppression of the Russian Tsars and during Russian imperial rule. We've survived Stalin's enforced famine, Holodomor. We survived the Second World War, where most of the fighting was done in Ukraine, Nazi occupation, all that stuff, Chernobyl, Revolution of Dignity. Like, we will survive this as well. It's a matter of how long it's going to take, and that's where other people can step in, because we are doing our part. We are fighting tooth and nail to keep our country our own, and to keep our heritage our own, and to specifically have the possibility to carve out our own future, a future that we want, how we want it, because of how we are, right? And so I think that our resilience is extremely, extremely strong. And so in the situation that, for example, Russia would win this and would take our country, I think a lot of Ukrainians would leave if they could. As I mentioned, like, I wouldn't come back there. I have no no desire to visit Russia ever in my life now. And yeah, I think our independence means a lot to us. We have fought very hard to get it, and we're not going to give it up this easily just because a bully is literally, invading us.
Yeah, it feels like, and I mean, I want to get back to the bully comment because I think it's a really interesting view of it. But you mentioned, I mean, the importance of the heritage, the importance of independence. And it seems like a big part of that is the values, the democratic values that are part of Ukraine today that have helped Ukraine to thrive, it seems like in the last 30 years, to really develop itself. And I think I've been to Ukraine, to Kiev. It's a beautiful place. It's a wonderful city. And I think that's also something when you see on the news, a country or city at war, you see a place at war and you're like, okay, well, yeah, it's at war. It looks like a war place. And then it's good to remember this is actually a beautiful, lovely city with people and restaurants and jobs, and for people to understand that as well, that what is under attack as well, like these values and these things that are important and really make a difference in your life and the one of your family.
Thank you for saying this, because this is a point that I have personally felt very strong about. I think that people see images of these bombed like residential houses and they think that Ukraine looks like a developing nation or something. It's very bleak and stark. Of course there's rubble everywhere, but Kiev is, up until this point, was thriving. It was developing so quickly. It's one of my favorite cities in the world to visit. When I went there last in 2018, it's just flourishing with all these young people my age who grew up, who were born in Ukraine, who feel Ukrainian, who want to nurture and embrace their Ukrainian identity, because this is the first cycle of life where we have actually been given the opportunity to do so from a young age, right? It hasn't been interrupted by the Soviet Union or anything else. And so there's so much creativity. There's all these incredibly talented like designers, independent designers who are making clothes that's Ukrainian, rooted in Ukrainian folk clothes. There's all these incredible musicians who are singing in Ukrainian instead of Russian. And there's new businesses, there's amazing restaurants, as you said. And so of course, Putin is going to see this as a threat because he sees that Ukraine is developing quickly because it is embracing freedoms and democracy and moving in the direction where its people have liberties and feel like free actors. They feel like they can control their own destiny within the state and feel protected by it. And I want to a little bit back up here. You going through these questions earlier, you had a question about like why my mom and I came to America. And I was talking to my mom about this last night because I was 7, so it wasn't my decision to make at all. But it was really interesting to ask her. I was like, Mom, did you want to move because you wanted me to have a better life? And she was like, no. She was so defensive. She was like, no, I loved Ukraine. I loved my job. You were happy there. This was like the hardest thing for me to do, to leave Ukraine. I loved this country so much. I loved my life there. I was so happy there. Like, I wanted you to move because I wanted you to have a happy family. And so it just so happened that the person that she met lived in the United States. And so even then in 2001, not 2022, she was like, this country is beautiful. I'm so happy to be a citizen of this country. And of course, it's always going to be a threat to somebody who literally has to have the propaganda run media and who has to threaten people with police and who has to assassinate people who speak out against the regime. So it's always going to be a threat to him. And so that's why I earlier I was saying that I don't want to fully blame the Russian people. They are complicit 100%, but this is also what they've been brainwashed with for the past 2 decades.
What do you think can stop this? You mentioned the word bully. I think it's an interesting view when you look at the geography of Russia and your geography of Ukraine, it almost looks like this big monster trying to eat this tiny piece of land. And the military force of Russia is highly bigger than the military force of Ukraine. So it does feel like, you mentioned this bully that's coming in and wanting to just by force change people's identity and making them part of it. And so I'm curious to understand, like, what stops the big bully? There's other bullies in the world, and the United States is another type of bully, and they could come and say, pick on someone your own size, And then it creates, I think, a bigger threat to the world, because there's these two nuclear powers that come and confronting, and we see this with the Biden administration, how there is a support of Ukraine, but very careful in not bringing military forces, which would create World War III, which is something that, this is very frightening to most people. And I think right now this is affecting a lot Ukrainians, of course. Can you maybe explain why other people should also care that are outside of Ukraine, why this matters?
Yeah, I can. People should care because, again, I can't reiterate this enough. Ukraine is a sovereign country. It's a free country. It's a country that carved out its own destiny and is working hard to continue to progress that. The Ukraine of 2022 looks different than the Ukraine of 1992 or 1998 or 2002. It's on a continuous path upwards, in my opinion. And so people should care because Putin in this action, Putin and his leaders, I want to say, right, to hold everyone accountable, they have acted with complete disregard for international law, for norms, and for human rights. This is a European democracy of 44 million people. And just like that, they're at war, defending their right to live. Okay, so this is all those principles which our societies are built upon: democracy and freedom, all the things that in America we say are of the utmost importance. This is the number one thing that we have to protect for each individual person and for society at large. This is under attack. And the way that Ukrainians are fighting back right now and defending themselves, they are giving these words meaning. They are showing what it means to sacrifice their lives to make sure that their families and their people can preserve these liberties. They are fighting and dying for a new democracy, the democracy they want. And this is we can't, it's so hypocritical to not defend that or to not care about that, because that is literally the foundation upon which all of our societies in Europe and in the United States and many other places in the world are formed. And this should outrage you that innocent people are dying without any provocation from even the Ukrainian government. It's slaughter. Ukrainians are being hunted. They say that they're targeting only military buildings, but they're not, as we have seen on social media. And now, then it percolates up to the news, residential buildings are being hit. People are getting run over by tanks. Cars are being shot at as they try to escape from the cities that are being shelled. It's horrifying. And who's to say that Putin will stop at Ukraine? Why would he? This is a man who is clearly out of control, who is living in his own world that he has created, his own delusions. He's creating his own ideology. He has rewritten history in his mind, and he is feeding it to the masses in Russia. And he is fighting tooth and nail to make sure that no other media gets infiltrated into Russia to keep this tight narrative that he's created to justify what he is doing for himself, to prove himself to the world. And so what happens when he gets to the border of Poland? Why do we wait? Why should we wait until then to do something about it? War is unpredictable and it can escalate quickly. And especially with someone like him, he needs to be stopped point blank. I don't think diplomacy will do it with him. He is beyond diplomacy. This needs to come from people. I had kind of gone around Instagram earlier this week, and I'm trying to empower the people who keep track of my life and me, and I'm trying to empower them to understand that people stop wars, not politicians. And the most important people right now who can stop this are actually living in Russia. And it's terrifying, but they have to protest, they have to speak against this, they have to show that the country is not behind this. And then for us, everyone else, we have the responsibility to speak out against this injustice as well, and not just with our circles of friends, which is very important, because we need to make sure everyone understands what is actually happening, what is actually at stake here, all of it. But we need to put pressure on our governments to do more. And I understand it's a sensitive situation because Putin is threatening nuclear arms, but that is exactly why he should be stopped. who's to say that he's going to take over Ukraine and not continue to do so? If not now, when? How many lives need to be lost? How many children, how many women need to be killed? How many men, how many sons in order for this to end? And so every single person should care about this. It just so happens that it's happening in Ukraine to Ukrainian people, but it could happen anywhere. And I would like to think that if it happened anywhere, the outrage would be the same.
Is Ukraine just going to kind of push until there's enough dead that do you think the Russians are going to say, like, okay, actually, let's go back home?
Yeah, I think we need to keep pushing with sanctions and with support from the West for Ukraine. And we need to specifically target, not, there were sanctions against Putin, but Putin gets all his money from like, he's laundering it from the people, right? And so we need to also target all the oligarchs, all the leaders who benefit from him being in power, because we need his own government and his own people to turn on him. And he can't do anything if the country's not complicit anymore. Like, I use that word a lot, but it's really true. If you just allow this to happen, it will continue to happen. So I really think the most important thing that's going to make a difference here, the thing that's really going to change things around, is that his own cabinet step outside of the fear that they might be killed or whatever, and are brave and courageous enough to stand up against him, to say no. Because I guarantee you, if 1 or 2 or 3 people do it, a lot more people will do it, and eventually, like, we can actually stand a chance. So it's really like everyone needs to work together right now. Ukrainians need to keep defending themselves and to keep fighting. Europe and the US and any other superpowers need to continue to support Ukraine, and the Russian people need to break through the bubble that they've been living in. They need to see what is wrong about this, and Russian leaders need to say no to Putin and to stand up to him.
I think a lot of the people that are listening to you right now are probably in a comfortable place. They're probably not being attacked by Russians in their hometown. And they're probably listening to this and watching the news, and I think feeling that empathy, seeing the courage of the Ukrainian people, the courage of the Ukrainian president, and feeling like, what can I do as an individual? I'm just one person, what can I do? And that's something that I would love for you to share, kind of actionable things that people can do really right now, and that can have an impact that can make a difference.
Yeah, so it's kind of what I alluded to in my response earlier. The number one thing you can do is, in my opinion, is raise noise, like make clatter around this, not take it in on your own. I know it's really overwhelming. I know it's hard to feel like it affects you, especially for my friends in America, who are on the opposite side of the world from this. But this is something that you should continue to talk about. You should talk to your colleagues, to your friends, to your family about it, so that you can put everyone on the right side of history. Putin was saying that allegedly, and this is all not factual, that Ukrainians in Ukraine were committing genocide against Russian people who are living in Ukraine. This is a blatant lie. And the genocide that is happening now is against Ukrainians. We are literally being killed only because of our ethnicity, because of the languages we speak, and because of the nation we want to be part of. Please talk about this. This is not okay. Beyond that, the number one thing to do is to contact your representatives, call and email them. It literally takes 5 minutes. There's simple templates you can copy and paste. You don't have to make it personal. If you don't know what to say, you're just copy and paste one of them. I've posted one of them. I have friends who have posted them. It's like pinned to my highlight reel in Instagram. You can just Google it. You can look it up on Reddit. It's very easy. But if we bombard them with communication, they represent their constituents. They represent us. They have to listen to what we want and what we have to say about this. And if they see that this outrages us as it should, they will act quicker. Right now, time is the number one thing that matters. Every minute, every hour, every day counts. Every single one. And so you twiddling your thumbs and saying, I can't help part of this, that's just not true. And so beyond that, specifically for when you do get in touch with your representative, the number one thing to ask for is humanitarian aid, so that everyone there can have access to food, water, shelter, and everyone who gets out can be protected and safe as well, so that buildings can eventually be rebuilt, so that the army can have medical supplies, etc. And the second thing to ask for is more military weapons. A number of countries in Europe have started to provide weapons in the past 2 days. It needs to be more. If we're not going to send boots on the ground, which I understand is a really big action to take and drastic, we need to supply the Ukrainian military. There's this one organization that I covered when I worked as a journalist in 2014 in Seattle, covering, how the start of this conflict was affecting Ukrainian Americans. And there's this really great organization called Come Back Alive, which provides non-lethal military supplies to the Ukrainian army. And I had talked to some of the volunteers who work day in and day night, right, raising funds and getting supplies. And this one man had told me that until their charity was formed, that Ukrainian pilots had been flying with maps from 1960. They didn't even have modern GPS devices. And when you're opposing an army with 190,000 soldiers, you need those kinds of supplies. You need to be able to pinpoint things and fight on a level playing field. Besides that, there's a number of humanitarian organizations you can personally donate to as well, like the Red Cross initiative in Ukraine. There's many, many others. I have a link pinned on my Instagram page. I can share it with here as well, but it is not hard to find a charity that is doing really good work right now. And beyond that, there's also stories of individuals who are collecting resources and funds and going to the border of Poland and Ukraine to help refugees. There are people coming from America, there are people coming from Europe. You can find these stories on all over social media, and you can personally support these people by sending them PayPal or whatever. There is no action too small. Even if you have $5 to send, that does something. That, I saw this thing from the Red Cross where it's like, that gives you X number of syringes. Like every single bit helps. You don't have to donate $1,000 for it to be meaningful. It can be $5, it can be $10. It can be once, it can be twice, but you are taking action, you are supporting what's right, and that's what matters. And then another thing I want to say too is, it's been really hard for me as a Ukrainian person to go on social media and see just like life as normal, business as usual, posts from everyone, like outfits of the day and what you're eating today and all this stuff. And like, I understand that we as a society have to keep the wheels turning. We have to keep living 100%. I don't want you to stop living your life. I want you to enjoy it. I want you to celebrate it, especially considering, the contrast of everything going on in my country, home country right now. But at the same time, like, I want people to be sensitive about what is happening and the fact that they're taking up space from people who are sharing all this valuable information on social media right now. And so just for a few days, please, like, try to be sensitive about that. And you don't have to showcase your life right now, right? There are more important things at stake than those personal moments. You can save those personal moments for later, or you can live them in the present moment. Like, I'm in Costa Rica, and I'm sure as hell I'm not going to post pictures from the beach in my story right now. Like, I can't justify it in my head. And of course, I know that I have personal connections to Ukraine and this is my country, but I would think that this kind of sensitivity would extend to others as well, or they would at least be cognizant of how that could hurt someone who's looking from afar. Because there are a lot of really good resources being shared on social media. Like, really, social media right now, it's a blessing and a curse because everyone has access to it. So there's propaganda and misinformation as well. But for the most part, it's been showing these stories of Ukrainian heroism, which are inspiring us. That's been coming from social media and not from the news. It's been showing about the war crimes going on, civilians being shot at and killed. We wouldn't have access to that information if it wasn't for social media. So we need to make space for all this to percolate, so that we can have a record of what is actually happening, and so that we can then have the appropriate measures be taking place. Like, this needs to be treated as a war crime, but in order for a war crime to be labeled as such in a court or in a governing body that matters, there needs to be evidence. So that's my spiel on that. It's something that's been really bugging me. And so I just really want to highlight that as well.
Thank you. So I was taking notes. I'll also share these and the specific links in the show notes so people can really click and take direct action. So it seems like first First one is spread the message. Spread the message, make sure that this is top of mind, and share this on your social media, share it with friends, share it around, share this podcast. Number two, talk to your representatives, humanitarian aid, military weapons, talk to their representatives. They represent you, and that can make a difference. And number three, donate. And number four, be mindful and sensitive on social media. I mean, number four kind of linked to number one, spread the message. If you want to share something, maybe focus on this, acknowledge that this is an important topic right now. You can continue living your life, of course, but when you spread something, be mindful and be sensitive. So all of that I'll share as well. I think this is good stuff and things that people can really do. And like you said, even $5 can make a difference. I want to end with hope, Kseniya. What gives you hope in the world right now?
What gives me hope is every single Ukrainian that is enduring this and that is fighting this and is defending themselves against this. Every day I go through my Reddit posts and I see stories of a Ukrainian couple, a young newlywed couple that just got married and then immediately went to be part of the Kiev militia to defend their city. There are lines of people waiting to fight to be armed, and that's again why we need more military supplies, because now we have more people wanting to fight than we have military supplies. There are lines of men between the ages of 15 up to 80, and grandpas who are like, I want to fight to defend my country. But there's also women. There's so many women in the military and also on the streets. Like, everyone is doing their part. Everyone is standing up against this. I'm proud of every single Ukrainian who is not in Ukraine right now. My Ukrainian friends in New York who are working nonstop. They're going to protest. They're sharing information on social media. They're speaking in Russian to address their Russian friends and followers. They're worrying. We are all, even when we're far, we're all part of it as well. And we're all working together to prevent this from erasing us, to prevent this from squashing us. And there's so much power that is being shown. Like, we are more powerful than Putin accounted for, literally. He did not expect this to happen. He did not expect us to fight like this. He did not expect for the whole world to speak out against him. Not the whole world, because there are countries that have not vocalized no, and that's important to highlight. But many countries have. And I just, every day I open up something and it makes me cry. There's videos of Ukrainian soldiers like singing songs, in the streets when they have a moment of rest about Ukraine and the glory of Ukraine and what the country means to them. And it's just so moving. It's something that I wish we didn't have to see, because I wish the circumstances didn't have to lead to this moment. But now that it has, like, the Ukrainian people have truly shown to the world who they are, who we are, what we are willing to fight for, how we are willing to fight for it, and that even when we're the underdog, we are so strong and we are so capable. And so that's really what's been keeping me hopeful and keeping me focused on a positive outcome rather than a negative one.
Yeah, I think something that you're mentioning, the power of the people and understanding this. As kids from the 90s, you and I, we've seen videos, movies of war, but never felt like we were going to live it. And you're definitely living it right now. Your country is. And I hope that this podcast can also show for people to be able to empathize with that and understanding that this can happen to them, and that war is not just something that's in Hollywood movies, and it's something that's very present and currently is very, very present and real for you, for your family, for the people of Ukraine. Kseniya, thank you for sharing your story. Is there any last things that you'd want to share that we didn't touch on today that you want to make sure is said? Yes. Good.
Yeah, I actually do want to say something. It was about what people get wrong about Putin or misconceptions that they have about him. And I think this is really important. This is something that I talked to my mom about last night. And I really appreciated what she had to say about this, because it was really eye-opening for me, because I recognize the truth in it. The media, especially the Western media, has built him up as someone who's very big and very scary and very powerful and very brute. And he certainly has spent a lot of money in his own country to make himself appear so. There's pictures of him riding bears, there's plastic surgery, there's this and that. There's a number of things. But I want everyone to understand that he is not as powerful as the media or as we seem to think he is. As a leader, he's not a good orator. He doesn't know how to give beautiful, inspiring speeches like the president of Ukraine right now. He doesn't know how to lead by empowering people. He only knows how to lead with fear. And that is weak. That is cowardly. That is not the sign of someone who is strong and powerful and big and scary. He's frightful, right? Because he's out of control. But we should not give him the power of giving him this big persona. He has to assassinate people to keep himself in power. He has to pillage other countries and attack innocent people. He has to take down residential buildings. These are not things that define someone who's strong. He is a coward. He is a coward. That's it, at the core of it. And everything that he does is out of fear to preserve himself. He is totally disconnected from reality. It's all smoke and mirrors. And so I say this, I know it's very daunting, but I say this because, again, it shows the fact that we have power. People have power. We have the power to undo this narrative and to poke all of the holes in it and to take away this false power and this false cloud around him that we have given him. We have the power to take away what he thinks makes him great. He is not great. He is weak and he is small, and we can highlight that. And I think that is something that will help us stop all of this. So let's not speak of him as if he is Genghis Khan or something, this is a man and he can be stopped and he will be stopped and we will stop him. End of story.
I think it's a good way to end it. I'm happy that you added that point. I was reading yesterday that currently the size of the economy of Russia is approximate to the size of the economy of Spain. And that's, people still have this idea of Russia as this big power that is less like it was before. And I think that's an important point to add. So thank you for adding that last part about Putin and in the end, the Russian Empire, or how it can look like to other people and that are fearful and that are afraid to step in because of that. I feel like there is I feel like 100 years ago, there wouldn't have been this international outrage. I still feel like there is something. I feel like that is an evolution. Let's see how I think this conflict will be telling, and let's see how it evolves.
Yes, thank you. So shout out to my mom.
What's her name?
Oksana.
Oksana. Shout out to Oksana. It's funny
because we actually have the same name in a way, because my name is Kseniya, but my Russian nickname is Ksyusha, and her Russian nickname is also Ksyusha. So we both go by Ksyusha. It always causes a lot of confusion in the house when my dad is calling for us.
Well, a big thank you, Kseniya. A big thank you to your mom as well for participating. Also, through you, thank you for sharing your story. I could send only courage and love, and let's continue spreading the message.
Thank you. Thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to share some of my feelings about this and clear up some of those misconceptions that I think people aren't taking the time to really dig into as much. So really appreciate this platform, really appreciate all the mindful and thoughtful questions that you also put together for me. This really does mean a lot to me. So thank you.
All right. Thank you for listening and for educating yourself. As I am editing this episode, Kseniya shared with me that her family was stuck in Ukraine as their car broke down in a dangerous zone. We are doing what we can to help. You can help as well, Kseniya's family, as well as many others, by donating to the links in the show notes. I also share in the show notes the different ways that Kseniya suggests that you can help. I have personally donated and will donate an additional $10 to the Red Cross every time someone shares this episode on social media for the next week. So please make sure to tag me or Kseniya so I can track it. If you're looking for daily updates and actions you can take, you can follow Kseniya on Instagram at Kseniya. That's K-S-E-N-Y-E-A-H. We are seeing a lot of bravery from Ukrainian people, but they don't have a choice. They are fighting for their lives and their freedom. You have a choice. You can make a difference. To close, I would like to share a note written in 1946 by German pastor Martin Niemöller. First, they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a socialist. Then, they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out, because I was not a trade unionist. Then, they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out, because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Stay brave. Peace and love.